Ooh, this freshwater's not to my liking. It's a bit too fresh for me. I do like a bit of salt water, don't I? But not in my cuppa. I've got nothing for that one. How are we doing, everybody? I hope you're all right. And today's video is going to be a bit interesting. We're going to move from the ocean, we're going to move upstream a bit, and we're going to visit our good old friend, as long as they don't eat me, Pannoniasaurus. So, what is a Pannoniasaurus? Well, if you haven't guessed already, he's a mosasaur, and he's a fine one at that. Pannoniasaurus inexpecticus was a 5-metre long mosasaur that was found in freshwater deposits in Hungary. This medium-sized mosasaur lived from about 85.3 to 83.5 million years ago during the Santonian to possibly the earliest Campanian. There's a bit of with the fossils. And speaking of the fossils, fossil bones from several individuals of Pannoniasaurus, all the different life stages, have been found in the Shenbia, sorry for the butcher of the pronunciation, and the Ajka coal formations in Hungary, and these date from about the Santonian to possibly the earliest Campanian. Now, the environment that Pannoniasaurus lived in Hungary during the Santonian was a lush freshwater environment containing many rivers and deltas, and this meant that it could provide for not only aquatic animals like Pannoniasaurus, but also land vertebrates. And as you can see on screen here, this is just a load of different vertebrate remains from the same sites as Pannoniasaurus. A lot of these actually represent crocodiles, dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and a whole host of other creatures that Pannoniasaurus lived alongside and possibly hunted, maybe. This also includes this little fella, which is a small dog-sized ceratopsian known as Ajkaceratops, which is quite enigmatic because they've only found its beaks, and that's about it. We know nothing else about it. We don't even know if that's a correct reconstruction, so bad on our part if we got that wrong. Now, Pannoniasaurus, as I stated earlier, was a freshwater mosasaur, and it's specifically a plesiopedal, plesiopelvic mosasaur, which means it had very primitive limbs for a mosasaur, so it would have had hands, so you could have given a handshake, although I don't recommend doing that. You could get your hand bitten off. And also, like its close relatives such as Tethysaurus, Russellosaurus, and even the Agalosaurs, it had a primitive plesiopelvic hip, which means the hip was still quite large in comparison to derived mosasaurs, which have more reduced hips. This probably meant that Pannoniasaurus was not an efficient swimmer like its derived cousins such as Mosasaurus and Tylosaurus, but it was adapted enough to where it could swim quite well in these freshwater environments. Now, Pannoniasaurus was most likely a freshwater mosasaur because many individuals of many different ages have been found in the deposits in which Pannoniasaurus has been found, and therefore suggest that this animal was a year-round occupant of freshwater environments and probably very rarely entered the oceans. And Pannoniasaurus isn't actually unique in this. In fact, derived mosasaurs such as Cladastes, Platycarpus, and Palaeoplatycarpus actually seem to have weekly or bi-weekly entered freshwater environments based on isotopic analyses. And why was this? Well, they still needed fresh water to drink. They can't drink seawater, it's too salty for them. They wouldn't like it in their cup of teas, just like Marty don't like it in his cup of teas. Hey, yeah. I'm sorry, that joke wasn't funny. I know I've done it in 2 videos, but hey ho. Now, due to Pannoniasaurus having quite a flat skull, this inferred that Pannoniasaurus was probably a hunter a lot like a crocodile, even though it shared its environment with quite a few different crocodilian species. So this meant that no one in the environment of Pannoniasaurus was safe, not even if you were on land. Possibly, Pannoniasaurus was also hunting the small ceratopsians that I showed you at the start of the video. But what was Pannoniasaurus primarily feeding on? Now, funnily enough, in 2017, a paper came out describing some of the first vertebrate coprolites from the same deposits as Pannoniasaurus. Now, these coprolites came from a wide range of different animals because they contained fish scales in some of them and plant material in others. And as you can see, I don't think Pannoniasaurus was a plant eater. I mean, no. Now, we're not exactly sure what the producers of these coprolites were, but it's more than likely that Pannoniasaurus was one of the ones that was eating the fish. And additionally, its small teeth were actually perfectly suited for hunting and catching slippery fish. Now, a little gripe I have with Pannoniasaurus is actually the designation of the holotype. That's it. Yeah. Now, this bone right here is the quadrate, which is an ear-shaped bone that actually articulates the top jaw and the bottom jaw together in mosasaurs, as well as their relatives such as Komodo dragons and snakes. Now, for some reason, the paper that described Pannoniasaurus decided to designate this one bone as the holotype. The problem is that every other bone, individual bone found, cannot be compared with this. For context, when we assign a holotype, we assign a specimen or a bone that has very distinctive features that are unique to that species and that species alone. Now, the argument's sake was that because Pannoniasaurus was most likely the only mosasaur within the environment, all bones of this small mosasaur were likely Pannoniasaurus, so therefore this designation is a bit... it's not technically right, but hey-ho. And speaking of the first paper that actually described Pannoniasaurus, which was from 2012, if I haven't mentioned it already, I don't know. The paper actually resulted in the creation, or designation if you like, of Tethysaurini, a mosasaur group that contained Pannoniasaurus, Tethysaurus, Jaguarosaurus, and Russellosaurus. Unfortunately, at the time, the designation was incorrect because the official definition didn't include one key aspect, and that was Tethysaurus itself. Because of that lack of specification of, hey, all these mosasaurs are more closely related to Tethysaurus than any other mosasaur, that designation became a bit defunct. Yeah. Also, some time and place, Jaguarosaurus and Russellosaurus actually left the group, only leaving Pannoniasaurus and Tethysaurus in the group. And this creates a new issue because the difference in time between Tethysaurus and Pannoniasaurus is about 10 million years. That's a lot of time. That's about nearly a third of the time of the derived mosasaurs actually existing. Yeah. So this actually creates what's known as a ghost lineage, where we have a starting point and an end point of a lineage, but nothing in between that. However, some other remains of European Tethysaurini, possible Tethysaurini, have actually been found across Europe, including the Czech Republic. And unfortunately, because of recent events in mosasaur paleontology suggesting that there's a lot of convergence between different individual species and different individual families, Pannoniasaurus might not be a Tethysaur, but who knows at this point. But overall, this is a very strange and very exciting mosasaur that sort of flips what we know about mosasaurs. And then the question becomes, why did it enter the freshwater? Now, this is a little bit of speculation from myself, but I believe that Pannoniasaurus inexpecticus, or an ancestor of it, actually returned to the freshwater environments from which its possible agalosaur relatives actually came from, invading the ocean. So what does this mean? Well, it means that Pannoniasaurus was probably pushed into these freshwater environments via competition, and the only thing around the time that would have provided that competition, that would have overwhelmed the ancestor of Pannoniasaurus or Pannoniasaurus itself, is other mosasaurs. That's right, other mosasaurs competed with other mosasaurs, and therefore the ancestor of Pannoniasaurus or Pannoniasaurus itself actually invaded the freshwater to eke out a living. And in fact, they did quite successfully, based on the fact that there are numerous remains of numerous individuals all across the Santonian in Hungary. So, I hope this was quite an interesting video. Definitely something unique in mosasaurs, and I hope you learned something from this. See you later, guys. Have a good day. Ta-da.